Let's talk about CSS. There is something fun about CSS. Historically speaking, CSS, first of all, is CSS a programming language, yes or not? Yeah. People is biased, right? Half of the community says it's a programming language, half of the community says it's not a programming language. There are some ways to evaluate it. Yeah? There's something called, is that Turing complete? It's a way to check if something is a language. CSS is not Turing complete. Anyway, it's getting more complex. Yeah? I think we agree on that. However, even though JavaScript, a long time ago, the majority of the JavaScript experts thought that the language was strong enough to do good things, few complex things. With CSS, it wasn't like that. With CSS, we always got the feeling like it was still too simple, too simplistic. We still need more and more and more and more to do basic things like aligning, centering stuff, yeah? It's a classic job interview. How do you center something in the middle of the screen, vertically, yeah? It's been a challenge, historically speaking. You used to rely on hacks and weird techniques. However, since the introduction of Flex and especially Grid, finally approved on December 2017, CSS became massively complex in that, which is a good thing, right? Because now I think it's the first time I got the feeling in my life, and I've been working with CSS for many years, that now the problem is on me. If I'm trying to get a complex layout, I got the feeling that finally CSS gives me the tools. It's up to me to learn how to use these tools appropriately. Yeah? And I'm still in that process of learning, not because of Flex, but because of Grid. So today I would like to talk about both, mostly about Flex, but we'll also see the limitations of Flex, and we'll see in which circumstances it's worth spend and investing on Grid. I keep my DevTools open, which you should always do, and then let's play a bit with some code snippets. So I'll try to increase the size as much as possible, something like that. That's probably all I can do, a bit more. Yeah, something like that. Cool. So I got this message, and then on the right-hand side, so let's do something. I'm going to create a few boxes, and we'll see how to deal with how to arrange them on the screen. Yeah. So working with Flex, so generally speaking, what you do is you set up like a parent container, could be a div. So I'll put the class name container for now, and then inside of it I'll drop some boxes. Class name box. And as you can probably see, the boxes are displayed one after the other, because CSS, from the very first day in history, is block-based. That means every time you create a div, it will occupy the entire row, the entire space, all the width. Yeah? It's not the same if you use label or H2, H3. Yeah? Some elements got displayed in an inline way, but generally speaking, I'll be talking about divs. Yeah? It's one after the other. That means that in classic CSS, if you wanted to have a grid with two columns, the classic 90s website with the menu on the left and the content, static content on the right, that wasn't that simple. Yeah? You have to deal with things like float. You remember float? Float left, float right, and that has some negative implications which go beyond the scope of this session. Fortunately, now we got Flex. So with Flex, all the things got simplified. Yeah? Or in other words, it's a bit harder to write CSS, but it's way more powerful and predictable and stable, apart from Google 74. So let's go to the CSS. I created something called container, and then as part of the container, which is the wrapping element, I can select the container, hopefully, on the right-hand side. You see the blue box, this is the container. But because I want to display one element after the other, first of all, let me increase the size of the text before going any further, for readability purposes. Cool, I think that works, Cool, and then let me remove the title. We don't need it anymore. We know what we are talking about. Cool, 4 boxes. Let's even at the border, being a bit bolder if you want. Yeah, I think that works. Cool, fantastic. Again, all the boxes get displayed one after the other. But now, with Flex, you can easily display them in a single row, one after the other, but not in a column layout, but in a row layout, yeah? One after the other, horizontally speaking. Simply if you type display Flex, look at what happened. I'll reduce the font size a bit. So you see the effect, right? Just by changing the display, which by default is block, but now you put Flex, look what happened. And look at what happened if I disable it. You see? So by simply typing display Flex, all the elements get displayed in the same line. However, everything is aligned to the left, yeah? What happens if we want to change, for instance, to align everything to the right, center, to play a bit with that? There is a very sexy property. Does anyone know how to change the alignment of the elements?
Justify.
Correct, justify. You remember Microsoft Word, justify the text to the left, to the right? You can do pretty much the same thing. Justify content. And then, look, VS Code is giving you some hints. By default, the elements get start to the left, Flex start. But you can change that. Look at what happens if I put center. You see? And actually, for prototyping purposes, let's go to DevTools. Look. Special importance, first of all. Initial left, on the left, right. Sorry, flex end. You see? Flex start, everything on the left. Flex end, everything on the right. Space around, very important. You see? Space around puts a space in between. Space between, very important. You see the difference? Space between means it will move, stretch everything to the boundaries of the screen, and then the remaining space will be evenly distributed across the elements. So these are probably the two most important properties when talking about Flex. Display Flex and justify content to decide how the elements behave. But what happens if in reality we don't want to have any space between the boxes? We want to make sure that the boxes fit all the available space. Because we've got 4 boxes, each box should fit 25% of the space. But we don't have to put the CSS property with 25%, because if we add a 5th box, we want to dynamically make sure that they just accommodate all the available space. To do that, does anyone know which property stretches the elements? Which one? Wrap. No. We'll talk about wrap later on. For now, what you need to do on the child, on the box itself, you can type flex 1. And look at what happened. Boom. With flex 1, all the elements will do their best to distribute across the available space. If I have 1 element, it will occupy all the space, 100%. If we have 3 elements, oh, sorry. So if we have 2 elements, each element will be 50%, and so on. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool because, the bigger the screen is, the bigger the elements will be without affecting your layout too much. So that's all good. But then, in reality, obviously that can get a bit more complicated. What happens if, for instance, we want the first column, and only the first column, to be wider, because it's more important. We have a navigation panel. Well, the navigation panel may be a bad example, because generally speaking, it used to be smaller. But anyway, because of whatever reason, the first column should fit 50% of the space. So A should go until here, and then the remaining space should be distributed between B, C, and D. How do we do that? What? A different class. Well, of course, you need a different class. Yes, of course. Of course, you need a different class. So let's add a different class called big, or is big. Do you remember Smax, the book I recommended you? Yeah. The guy is a big fan of using that syntax. Is big, is important, is special. yeah, and I'm following his advice because I find it particularly interesting. So with this is does something, we specify that in reality we want to customize a bit the behavior of that element. So now we can type box.isBig, yeah? And now how do we change the properties of that element? You can do that. You can change flex. That was a number, yes? Now I'm going to put flex. Let's put 2, for instance. What happened? Actually, it worked. You can clearly see that the first column is now wider. Yeah. However, I hope you can see it's not 50%. And if you don't trust me, look. Column A, 203 pixels. Out of 500 something. It's almost 50%. It's not 50%. Let me put 3. That is 50%. So why flex 3 makes my first column to be 50%? The reason is, with flex, you can specify how many virtual columns your layout has. In other words, ignoring the isBig thingy, I'll comment it out for now. What are we saying? How many columns do we have? Visually speaking, we have 4 columns. But in reality, technically speaking, we have 1 first column, first box, plus 1 second one, plus 1 third, plus 1 fourth. So we have 4 virtual columns, and each one will take 1 out of 4. That's why they have the same space. However, if we change the flex of the first element, now we have 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. In other words, we have 6 virtual columns. The first one will span 3 out of 6. 3 out of 6 is 50%. Yeah? And the others will be 1, 6, 1, 6, and 1, 6. So 1, 6 plus 1, 6 plus 1, 6 is 3, 6, which is, again, 50%. Yeah? So that's the sexy way you can deal with flex. What happened if I change flex from 1 to 8,000, 800, whatever? Why nothing changes? How many virtual columns do we have?
4.
Wrong, not 4.
12.
How many?
12.
12, wrong. Wrong.
8.
Wrong. 400. I got it. Each element spans 800 columns. Yeah? In other words, 800 plus 800 plus 800 plus 800. 400. Okay, we got 400 columns. How many columns each box spans? 100. Yeah? 100 divided by 400 still is 25%. Yeah? That's why if all the columns have the same space, it doesn't make sense. Yeah? If you see a code like that, that's weird. 856, what that means? Yeah? Even things like 800, that doesn't make sense. Keep flex to 1 for simplicity reasons, unless you want to specifically change the width of one particular column. Yeah? That could work on the other way around. You could say, okay, all the boxes span 2 columns, however, the isBig spans 1, yeah? Which is a bit stupid, right? I wouldn't call it isBig, it should be is small or something like that. But still, it works, yeah? You see? So how many virtual columns do we have now? 7, correct. 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Yeah? That's why the first one spans 1 divided by 7. 2 divided by 7, 2 divided by 7, and 2 divided by 7. Make sense? Yeah? Any question?
May I ask something?
Yep.
Border, so how can I calculate the flex box? For example, we change the border size to each element. How can they calculate? Do you know how big is so? is included to flex? I mean, dimension?
That's a really good question. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about how the border affects to the calculations. To do that, to talk about that, let's talk about responsive design first. So let me simplify a bit. I'll remove the is big thingy. I'll keep flex one, even size for everybody, all happy. What happens if I want to change the layout? So if I go mobile, I want to display, because that could be okay for desktop, but for mobile, especially if we have a small one, that may not be that usable, right? Desktop, okay. On mobile, I want to display each element after the other. Yeah. So first of all, how do we change CSS property, generally speaking, on mobile? Or media query, correct. If you search CSS media query, yeah, if you don't remember the syntax, you always get that very nice article from W3 Schools. So you can just copy it somewhere in your code. And then look at the way we read that. Media only, yeah, screen. What that only screen word means. Sometimes you can set custom CSS if you want to print your page, yeah, things like that, which we don't care at the moment. So only screen and max width, I'll put 400 pixels. So the way it works, this is like an if-else, yeah? That's why more and more people think that CSS, it is a programming language, because that's an if-else, yeah? If the resolution is up to 400 pixels, then what? Then container, how do we tell the container to display everything after the other, all the elements? Correct. There are two ways. I'll show you the aggressive and the sexy. The aggressive way is, correct, display block. If I'm on mobile, it's like, yeah, I don't care anymore. Yeah? Yes, default. Yeah? So now, desktop, okay, mobile, yeah, you see? However, I find that strategy a bit aggressive. Why? Because if I go to the CSS, if I select my container, not my container, if I select the items, I will, it's a bit hard to read. Here you go. I will still see references to flex, which is a bit annoying because we are not using flex, yeah? That's why the sexy approach is, instead of changing the way that gets displayed, is to change the direction. You can type flex direction. By default is row, but you can put column, correct? Yeah? So now, still using flex, but we change the direction. Yeah? That could get a bit crazy. You can do column dash reverse. Yeah? Which I don't like it. I don't like column reverse or row reverse, because that means that by the first time, CSS can change the order of the elements. Yeah? To me, that shouldn't be the responsibility of CSS. That should be the responsibility of the HTML. It's about separation of concerns. But anyway, that's a bit philosophical. Anyway, column and row. Yeah, row the default, then you can change to column. But then, if you work with task number 10 or 11, don't remember in conflicts, you will see that sometimes life is not black and white. Yeah, there are gray scales. So in other words, we can, what if we, look what happens if we shrink the browser. Slowly, we move from 4 columns to 1 column. Wouldn't it be better to have 4 columns, then maybe 2 columns, and then 1 column? A bit more progressive, more fluid layout. So for that, we can remove the media query, because we are not going to differentiate between desktop and mobile, but we can tell Flex if the resolution, or let me rephrase that, if each element goes below a given width, then move things down. Yeah? If we cannot allocate so many elements in one row, move them below. So we need to do two things. First of all, the first thing is, look, at the moment, it doesn't matter how small the screen is. Flex will always keep everything in one line, always. So the first thing is, Flex, please relax a bit, take it easy. So you can tell Flex wrap. By default, it's no wrap, but you can type wrap. That means potentially be ready to wrap stuff. That means to move it to a new line. Yeah. It's not making, well, you see, now it's making a difference. You see, eventually, if there is no space, eventually, yeah. But what if we don't want to go that far? What if we want, for instance, to move elements if the size of each box goes, for instance, below 120 pixels? At the moment, each box has 144 pixels, yeah? So that's okay. But for instance, now, each box, still 120, still okay, but if we keep going, now, 111 pixels. So this, at that stage, I would like to move elements below. For instance, minimum width, wrong. Not with minimum width.
With a certain limit, the width of the box.
Yeah. And how do we set the width of the box? You cannot put width. If you put width, yeah, it's ignoring us. It's not working like that. Yeah, we can min width. No, it's not going to work. Well, right. But even if we use min width, okay, fair enough. You win. It works with min width. However, that's a bit, I don't know how to say that. The proper way to, even though that works and I didn't know that, the proper way to do with flex is typing flex basis. You may have heard about that, which is pretty much the same as min width. So flex basis means keep everything in one line if the boxes are at least 120 pixels, yeah? At the moment, 144, all good. Actually, let me put, let's leave it like that, 144. Now, what do we got now? Now we got 131, still okay. But at some point shortly, you see? Look, now 130. And now we got something interesting. It's not even waiting. I said 120 at the bottom, but as soon as the width goes below 130, it moves things around. Why? It's moving things 10 pixels above my threshold.
Because maybe you have the border.
Correct. And back to what Pelling asked before. Yeah? Because I said 120 pixels, but in reality, the box occupies 120 plus 5 on the left, plus 5 on the right. Yeah? Because of that, in reality, the actual width of the box is 130. This is the default behavior of CSS, and there is a way to change that. To say, hey, if my width is 120 pixels, also consider the border. So the border should be considered inside of the box, not outside. Do you know how to change that?
Box sizing.
Correct. You can type box sizing, and now border box. So that, in other words, that means if we talk about dimensions, the border is inside. So now, look, we got 130, but now it should be a bit more flexible. I can shrink the browser a bit. You see, still working. So, at what resolution, at the moment, it's hard to see, I cannot zoom that, is for 500 something. At what resolution the box D should move below? Say it again? 20 times 4. 480. It's 4 times 120, yeah? Because if it goes below 480, that rule is not satisfied anymore. It cannot allocate 4 items of 120 each. So, so if you pay attention, 506, 500 exactly now, 499, 490, 488, 85, 82, and 80, and now next pixel, boom, that's it. So when will be the next speed trap? 360, correct, Vivian. 390, 80, 60, you see? And then the last one will be, it's probably not even possible to reproduce. Oh, yes, we can. Yeah, eventually, if it goes below 240, yeah. In other words, now the layout is fluid. It doesn't matter if we got a 8K screen or a small smartphone. It always will adapt somehow. Any questions so far? Yeah. So this is Flex, and Flex works really well when talking about unidimensional layouts. In other words, if you have a single row or a single column, Flex is very powerful. However, here we are going a bit beyond the scope of Flex. Why? Because we are dealing with multiple columns. And what's the problem? Even though that looks completely acceptable, what do you think about that? That's a bit weird. Yeah? In a real layout, in a wall of boxes, you will expect D to end up here. Every box will have the same dimension. Yeah? However, it's not satisfying that condition. This is, again, because Flex was never thought to deal with multiple rows and columns. So if that's your problem, if that's your issue, then we got Grid. So Grid was thought to solve that problem. So I'm going to talk very quickly about Grid. So let me remove everything we've done about Flex. Yeah, keep the container and the box. Yep. Yeah, of course.
So I understand the criteria for media query is you use a number of pixels usually.
Use what?
The number of pixels.
Yeah.
If it's less than
Correct.
20,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, it's the same like, if you think of screens that maybe are higher resolution,
Yeah.
say that your phone today, I don't know, is like 600 width or whatever, one day we have it twice as much.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because they keep putting
Yeah.
on the screens, right? So it is resolution actually, you know. At some point it could be that it doesn't really go to the new line because
Yeah.
the number
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yep.
So I wonder, is there another criteria to use media query other than the number of pixels? Does it make sense? I don't know. Like, can the device say like if it's a vertical screen or a horizontal screen, for example? I don't know.
You can.
The relationship between the width and the height.
Yeah, you can talk about orientation, for instance. For instance, that works with an iPad. If orientation is landscape or portrait, yeah, you have some basic control. You can also talk about the aspect ratio, as Walter suggested. Yeah. So as part of the media query, you can customize a few things beyond the pixels. Yeah. Cool. Right. So let's talk about Grid. So let me put the font size again. And the border. So Grid is a huge wall. It can do so many things, and obviously I don't know all of them. If you want to know a bit more about CSS Flex or CSS Grid, there are some good articles on CSS Tricks. Probably you know that website already. So you type CSS Flex in Google, probably receiving the first result, correct? A complete guide to Flexbox. This is a really good article with lots of pictures. Yeah, it tells you how your boxes will behave. And pretty much the same thing about Grid. I'm pretty sure there is an article from CSS Tricks, a complete guide to Grid. It's equivalent, yeah? Again, Grid is way more complex. It's huge, it's absolutely huge. But anyway, that's a good thing, because that means it's super powerful, yeah? So, the first thing, if you want to display things as Grid, the first thing, unsurprisingly, instead of display Flex, display what? Grid, correct. Yeah, and then I'm going to show you only one property, only one of grid. Yeah, if you are curious, then please check the documentation. So the property that I use the most is grid template columns. It's a very powerful key in CSS. So look at what that means. So what that means is, with grid template columns, you can define your virtual columns. You remember the virtual columns we talked a minute ago? Look, if you put one FR, that means you have one column. If you put one FR space, one FR again, ooh, 2 columns. Yeah? What happens if I put another one FR on the right? We'll have 3 columns. Yeah? Look, which is what we got before, but now look at the difference. Look at the D box. Yeah, now it's absolutely brilliant because D has the same size as A, B, and C. Multi-column, multi-row layout. Yeah, that's much better. And what if we, back to the 2-column layout, what if we want the second column to be twice as wide as the first one? Correct? Look at what happened if I change one FR to 2 FR. See? You can see how easy dealing with grid is, yeah? At least in that particular scenario. Again, with grid, you can also talk a bit about things like responsiveness. I'm not going to talk about that, but just to give you an example. So we are using grid quite a lot in the Codiri platform. Things like I'll show you things like the training. You see, that's the point we report that guy reported this morning. But ignore that. This is Flex, by the way. But this is Flex. That's why it's broken. But this is grid. So in here, I specify that my layout has 4 columns. That's it. Yeah. The bigger the screen is, the wider each column will be, but that's it. We always have 4 columns. And finally, as I say, we always have a bit of responsiveness. So I would like to show you one example. Oops, it's taking a while to load, but I'll show you. So you may have noticed that when you want to join a challenge, you'll hopefully get a view with beginner, intermediate, expert. Yeah. Now the server is not working as good, as fast as we'd like. So anyway, in that view, which hopefully I'll be able to show you one day, you have, this is probably the most complex view on the entire Codiri platform because we have lots of nested grid and flex. And the reason why I'm trying to show you that, if it ever works, is because maybe you've seen that you got the picture of yourself, yeah? And that picture of yourself is sort of responsive. Here you go. Depending on the resolution, we show 2 pictures in a row, 3 pictures, 4 pictures, yeah? So there are some rules under the hood to decide how many pictures we saw. For instance, at the moment we got 2. If we maximize the screen, hopefully we'll get 3, you see? In a wider screen, we may get 4, you know, a bit of... Yeah. So here we're combining Flexbox, 3 columns, because I have 1 row, yes? And then for the pictures, this is grid. Yeah, and it's again the same principle. Any question? No? Cool, so that was it, guys. Thank you. Cheers.